Did you hit record?
Welcome everybody tonight. This is Stephanie Coleman with the Kansas Lend. A few housekeeping items before I bring up the slides. I want to let you know we are live on Facebook, and if your picture is or your video is on, you will be on Facebook when the slides are down. If the slides are up and you have your picture on, you're fine. Just want to let you know that. Normally, I'm usually dressed up for these evenings, but since tonight we're talking about advocacy and one of my favorite subjects and around my son, I am wearing a sweatshirt tonight for the University of the Ozarks, and you'll hear more about that in a little bit. And, you know, it's chilly here in Kansas today, so have to keep warm somehow. Anyways, we're welcome. Let me get these slides up and going. As I said, I am Stephanie Coleman, and I am with Jawanda Mass and Leah Hawley tonight. And you're here for Advocacy. It's All in the Family, a parent panel. So who are we? Stephanie Coleman. This is me with Matthew John. There's Jawanda Mass, and then Leah, who is with her boys, JP and Sean, who you'll hear more about. And she's got that. They all got that Chiefs color on. Too bad they're going to lose to the Buffalo Bills this Sunday. So we're going to talk about advocacy and why it's so important. As Jawanda and Leah, all of us can tell you, advocacy is so important, and we need more outspoken advocates, especially here in Kansas. In the Kansas City area. If you're from Missouri, I know Missouri needs some good advocates as well for our kiddos. But who is an advocate for children? And they can be parents, siblings, which you'll hear about siblings in a little bit, grandparents, friends, teachers, community members, and the individual. Obviously, the individual can be an advocate for themselves as well. Maybe they're not able to make all the decisions in their life, but they absolutely can make some decisions and advocate for those choices in their life. And I found this saying earlier today that I really enjoyed. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. And that's what we want for all of our children. So what is advocacy? Excuse me. Merriam-Webster says the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. But I really like West Virginia, their University Center on Excellence in Disabilities, their USED, which is sort of like our Kansas Lend. We have a Kansas USED over in Lawrence, but they describe advocacy as it involves promoting the interests or causes of someone or a group of people. An advocate is a person who argues for, recommends, or supports a cause or policy. Advocacy is also about helping people find their own voice. There are three types of advocacy: self-advocacy, individual advocacy, and systems advocacy. We'll really be talking about all three of those amongst our stories tonight. So why advocate? Advocate because we really need to elevate the voices of the families in the IDD community. IDD is intellectual and developmental disability community. Our stories matter, and we need to be telling them to anyone and everyone that listens, from school administrators, teachers, to community partners, to politicians, in Topeka, at your local levels, and at the federal levels. It's really important to let them understand what you're going through. If there are things that you're going through, you know, if life is great and easy for you, you're blessed. But that's not always the case for most families in the IDD community. So share that information. And I will tell you also, legislators, politicians, they want to hear from you. You don't want to hear from the providers and the professionals. And I hate to say that because I think we're all professionals, but they really want to hear from families. They really want to hear from their constituents what matters to them and why something isn't working, and how they can help you make it better. So as I say that, you're educating decision makers on the challenges, needs, and discrimination that the IDD community has every day. And I'm sure we see that, all of us see the different challenges and needs, and some of us see discrimination within the IDD community, no matter what your race is, what your gender identity, what your diagnosis is, what level that diagnosis is. We all see discrimination. But also you empower, and you're going to empower yourself, you're going to empower the families around you and the whole IDD community to advocate effectively on topics and policies important to the child's daily life. In your daily life, it's all of this advocacy is not just for children, it's also for yourself, for your self-care, supporting you so that you can go on and do other things that you need to do, like work and have a life, help with your other children, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not just advocating for the children, you also advocate for yourself. And again, another what I can't even think of the word, sorry. Thing I found today, why advocate? Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's just not. And I had someone probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and somebody asked me, how do we get people to care? And it's unfortunate, but if it doesn't happen to somebody, sometimes they just don't care. So when you do, you really need to step up and help in no matter what area that is. Here's a couple of, the next couple of things are just talking about the cycle of advocacy. You identify an issue. Think about it, and you don't even, like 9 times out of 10, you don't even have to identify it. It's right there glaring in your face, right? And you set the goals and objectives. So you identify, figure out where you want to go and the goals that you want to succeed. And then you identify who are the decision makers. Are the decision makers school officials? Is it something that's going on in school? Or is it something in your local community that they might be able to help with? Maybe it's the crosswalks or a inclusive and accessible playground. Or maybe it's something more important that's at the state level or federal level. You make those and you find out who the decision makers are, and you then craft a message and what your ask is, and deliver that to the decision makers. So you set your timeline. So you've got your issue, your goals and objectives, you know who the decision makers are that you need to talk to, and you define the message and you talk about the ask. What is it I'm asking for? So let's say it's a accessible playground in your local community, and you know the decision makers are your local town council. So you set those goals, you've got your issues, you know who the decision maker is, you start putting your message together. Why an accessible playground? Well, it's going to do many things, like all children will be able to get to play on that, right? But then also all children will be able to play together. It'll be inclusive, and other kids will get to know other kids, and understanding more around disabilities. And then you set your timeline. Figure out, when is their next meeting? Can you meet with some of them before the next meeting for coffee or something, and bring that message and that ask to them? Get them on your side, whether it's somebody on the town council. This is the same thing in Topeka or city if you're on the Missouri side. Find someone who will listen and find out when the opportunity is to bring that up to somebody. And once you've done that, you start accessing the resources and your tactics. How are you going to reach out to them? How are you going to talk to them? And then after you have, you evaluate and share. So that's kind of the advocacy cycle, but this really shows your methods. I kind of told you how to build that, but who are you doing this with? So again, let's talk about an accessible playground. You may want to start a public campaign. You might want to, when you influence policy, you might be providing testimony or speaking at the town council. Lobbying decision makers, like I said, go and have coffee with them and talk to them about the accessible playground, where and why it's important. Build partnership and mobilize others. What other parents in your community are in need of accessible playgrounds for their children? So you bring all of these individuals together. So here's some advocacy examples. Under healthcare advocacy, it might be treatment for a diagnosis. You just know something isn't right, but maybe your pediatrician isn't agreeing with that assessment. So you might ask for another second opinion. So you have to advocate for that second opinion. How about respect? I know a lot of times, especially as our children get older, we're seeing less and less respect for their experiences and their knowledge of what's going on with them. A lot of times doctors don't actually speak to them, but they might speak to you as a parent still. And at a certain age, you know, honestly, it should be from the get-go, but it's definitely around transition ages of around 14 to 16. They should be starting to respect that child enough to ask them how they're feeling, what's going on, and getting all that. And sometimes we just don't see that as parents. Educational advocacy. Now, I am not going to fool anybody here. I'm not an expert, but we do have an expert on education advocacy here that we'll be talking shortly. But you might be advocating for your child to have the right supports in school so that they can be successful in their classes. Also inclusion. I know this is a big one that Leah will talk about, inclusion. You don't want your child in a separate room all by themselves. You want them included in the mainstream school. And sometimes in those IEPs, they're talking about bringing them and putting them in a different classroom. So you might be advocating for that inclusion. Accessibility in the community, we've already talked about playgrounds. But what about bathrooms and buildings? I have a friend who uses a wheelchair, and I have learned when I was traveling with her that not all buildings and bathrooms are completely accessible. And now whenever I go anywhere, I always look to see, does that have accessibility? Sidewalks too. If you notice, some sidewalks, and more you'll see them, is sidewalks have that little ramp, and then there's like an orange or red thing with the dots and stuff like that. That's for those individuals who have a sight impairment, but also for that wheelchair user too, to go down. In older towns, you might find sidewalks that don't have that ramp anymore. And you'll see a lot of people that may advocate for those sidewalks to be taken care of. And then there's the policy. Here in the state of Kansas, some of the policy things that advocacy groups are working on for the disability community is the IDD waiver waitlist. So if you don't know, intellectual and developmental disability waiver, it's part of the home and community-based services waiver. It provides quite a bit of supports and services, but currently it is a 10-year wait list. There's over 4,000 individuals on this wait list waiting to receive services. And that's just, I mean, it's incomprehensive. Even think that there's that many people on this wait list waiting for services. And a lot of families during that time are in crisis. They need supports, they need services, they need respite, and that's not coming to them while they're waiting. Currently, I know that there is a study being done on that wait list, and hopefully after that is done, we'll see what they come back, information they come back and bring to the legislators in Topeka and see what's happening. I also know that there is a modernization committee going on currently this week, I think, on the IDD waiver that is looking to shake things up and may be bringing good and different choices on the waiver wait list as well. But we still need advocacy. Your legislators need to hear from you so that they know that you support ending the wait list and getting more supports and services for all families in Kansas. Another one is the supported decision-making bill. Previously, it was in the legislature in Topeka for the last 4 years. If you know about policy in Kansas, a bill is in session, is good for 2 years, and if it doesn't make it out and gets voted on, it dies the second year. And this one happened to do that, and it was reintroduced 2 years ago, and yet again, it still didn't go anywhere. So we're hoping that we'll be able to find somebody who's willing to introduce it again in January, and we'll see something happen with the supported decision-making. And for those that may not know, supported decision-making is an alternative to guardianship for individuals who are over the age of 18 that don't necessarily need guardianship. On the national level, there's lots of other things to advocate for as well. There's the ABLE counts. There currently is ABLE accounts in our around the country that are open. Here in Kansas, you can open an ABLE account. There's a lot more to ABLE accounts that I'm not going to get into tonight. You can always Google ABLE accounts to find out. But it is, ABLE stands for, and Jawanda will correct me if I'm wrong, but Achieving a Better Life Experience. It's a way for individuals with disabilities to save money while still receiving SSI, which is the net. So the reason ABLE accounts are still looking for advocates on the national level currently is because we're looking to increase the age from 26, I believe, to 42 to allow other individuals who may have received a disability after the age of 26 to participate in those accounts. SSI, for those of you who don't know, it's the Supplemental Security Income. It's for individuals with disabilities who have never worked, and that has never been overhauled since it came into creation. And I want to say, read something today about it, but it said 1989, but I know that it's been a lot longer than that. I think it was somewhere in the 70s. So it has not been updated, not their way of figuring out how much somebody receives. There's also a marriage penalty for those individuals who are married that might receive SSI. So we're looking to see some of that change. And then there's competitive integrated employment also on the national level, and you'll see it, a lot of people talking about it at the state level too. There is still sub-minimum wage employers in the state of Kansas and in Missouri as well, that pay less than minimum wage to individuals who work that have intellectual or developmental disabilities. And that's truly sad, and we need to change that so that everybody is receiving proper pay for their employment and their work so that they can become a contributing member to society where taxes are concerned and all that kind of stuff, and have more money to spend and enjoy their life. So these are just some quotes that I found today while I was looking. And they just really meant something to me and touched me. So the first one, there is no such thing as too much advocacy. Every action you take matters. Absolutely. I can't imagine anybody who would say, oh, no, we're done. We've done as much as we can in the advocacy world. Believe in yourself as a parent. You are your child's best therapist and advocate. I say that to every parent I speak to. You know your child better than anybody. You know what they need, and you know how to advocate for what their needs are. Every time you, this is one of my favorites too, and I know Leah will like this. Every time you're in an IEP meeting, know that you are not just advocating for your child, you are advocating for the next child after you. And then all children need a voice until they can speak for themselves. That's what advocacy is. It is speaking from a place of love and demanding rights be met. It is standing up for a child in need, especially our own. Our children have civil rights just like any other child, any other individual in this country, and we need to make sure that those rights are being given to our children as well. So I am going to start by sharing a little bit about my son, Matthew John. Matthew John is currently a 27-year-old college student at the University of the Ozarks in Clarksville, Arkansas, hence the sweatshirt I'm wearing tonight. And he graduates in 66 days, and it has been a long time coming, let me tell you. So we're really excited in the Coleman family. He's just got a few weeks left and he'll be a college graduate. He has wanted to go to college since he was 5 years old, and he saw me graduate. And actually it was December of 2000. I was gonna say 2020, but no. When I graduated in December of 2000, he was there, and he remembers being so proud of me, but he said that day that he wanted to go to college, and he's kept to that every year since. Though I will tell you, in high school, on the IEP, we talked about transition, and his goal was to go to college, and they didn't want to provide that goal and help him with that goal. They really wanted to, go back. They really wanted to get him ready for jobs. So he was in a job club and he was doing different jobs. And he kept asking me, Mom, why am I having to do all this? And it's not what I want to do after high school. And I said, well, it may not be what you want to do after high school, but you still, it's a good learning practices for you to have jobs. But again, I was adamant that they were putting in college in their IEP. So one thing, there's advocacy right there. Licensed driver at 23. I kind of laugh and chuckle about this. He couldn't wait to get his permit and get a driver's license at 15, 16. And then once he got his permit, he had no desire to practice driving. I said, okay, if you don't want to drive, that's fine. You don't have to drive. Honestly, I felt a lot safer on the roads without him driving at that point. And then at the age of 23, he said, Mom, I definitely want to drive now. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to drive, you have to go get the book. You have to study. You have to do all this, set up your permit test. You have to do all this. I will take you, but you have to set it up. And he did that. And then he took Johnson County Community College has a driving school, and he took that and became a licensed driver in November of 23. He came home from his last driving class, and he had his golden ticket, and he was so excited because he got to walk right into the driver's license office and hand that to them, and they took his picture and handed him a driver's license. I still did not ride with him. Somebody else taught him how to drive, practice driving, and I didn't probably ride with him until probably the last year. So, but he inspires to be a cameraman for his Kansas City Royals. He loves the Royals. I think the main reason he wants to be a cameraman for the Royals, he said, is so when they go back to the World Series again, he gets a World Series ring with them. But he loves his Royals. He follows them religiously, to the point where he texts me and lets me know every game and every minute. So hopefully he will work to that, because that's what he's going to school for. He will get a bachelor's degree in communications with a radio, television, video major. And when he is home, he plays sports. He's a Blue Valley Special Olympics athlete, and he plays sports. You can see that tennis picture. So I get to go and be a mom athlete and sit out in the sun and watch him sometimes. But Matthew is a typical young adult. He just happens to be autistic, and he makes me proud every single day. He didn't have a diagnosis until very late. He was 14 when he received his autism diagnosis. When he was 2.5, I knew something was going on at 2.5. I didn't know what. I assumed it was ADHD because that is what my family members had. So I kind of knew what ADHD was. And so I had taken him to the university where we lived at the time in North Carolina and asked him to be tested for ADHD. And he was diagnosed at the age of 2.5 with that. So I then attributed everything under the sun to ADHD, not knowing myself at the time to that. And then I realized when he was 14, he just, things were different. And I know it was that transition age. I thought he was he was depressed. So I took him and got him a therapist, and that therapist asked about if he had ever been evaluated for autism. And at that point, I hadn't even known what autism or ever heard of autism. So I was clueless, but I went back to his pediatrician, and his pediatrician said, "Oh no, I don't think he has autism." And I'm like, well, let's get him tested anyways. So we went ahead and went to KU, where I work now, and had him tested, and he was later diagnosed with autism. So again, you realize something just isn't right. You went to the doctor, you got a diagnosis. You just never end your advocacy for your children. Matthew now, he advocates for himself, but he still uses me as a supported decision-making individual. We've always kind of made decisions together. So it's not something that's unique to me or him. So there's that. And then my family motto, it's been my motto forever, but Matthew has picked it up for himself as well, is don't tell me it's impossible until after I'm finished. I don't like the word no. I will find another way around it. When Matthew was going to school, we found out that Kansas Vocational Rehabilitation will pay for schooling. And so we definitely signed up, we got started, and 6 months went by, and I'm like, what's going on here? He really wants to go to school. He had already heard about the University of the Ozarks. They have an amazing autism program down there. They have supports for not just academically, but personal supports as well with an autism specialist. He meets with an academic specialist every single day. They find him supports from writing specialists to tutors and all of that. And I was like, he was excited about that. He was excited it was far enough away from mom that he could be independent and on his own. And so I, went there to Voc Rehab knowing that this is where he wanted to go to school. And they're like, well, let's try Johnson County Community College again. And I'm like, okay, I'll play the game. And so even though we already knew that he wasn't successful there, we tried to add in some supports. They just weren't strong enough supports. They would say, oh, he can go to the writing center or the math center, but Matthew would go and he would sit there and wait for somebody to come up to him, and he wouldn't go and approach somebody. But even then he didn't, when he did get supports, he didn't get the one-on-one. So this went on for, let's see, that was 2016. 2018, I said, look, we have done all this. He still isn't as successful. He needs to be here. And there was a lot of strong advocacy. We'll just leave it at that. Strong advocacy. But in November of 2018, we finally got the green light that they would support Matthew going to the University of the Ozarks, which again is his choice. So they should obviously given that more weight when deciding making their decision as well. So he has been there since August of 2019. It's been a rough go because obviously we know COVID came in, the pandemic, and in his second semester he came home, and it was really tough getting through there. And then so he had come home for the spring, and then in the fall he was going back again. And I wasn't sure at that point I wanted him to go back in the fall of 2020. However, I knew because they were also going to be like taking all online classes and staying in their rooms, getting their food to go and staying in their rooms. So it's like, what kind of environment is that? But it was a learning environment, so I knew that he had to go back to school. So he went back. Every semester that he has been there, he has raised his GPA. So we're really excited about that. Anyways, so that's kind of quick overview of advocacy and our advocacy. 66 days will be on to a new goal for him. So now I'm going to turn it over to Wanda Mass to talk about start off with the power of inclusion and her daughter, Rachel.
Well, thank you, Miss Stephanie. That was really good. And that Dr. Seuss slide is one that I use in my grassroots advocacy presentations.
There you go.
We're all on the same page.
We are.
So I'm going to focus mostly on education advocacy today. I have done advocacy at all levels, probably most well-known for work on the federal level on the ABLE Act, though I've worked on federal, state, and local policy, but the roots all started with advocating for inclusion for my daughter, Rachel. And I currently am the manager of grassroots advocacy for the National Down Syndrome Congress. And I kind of worked my way into that position because I believe we all have a story, and our stories are powerful. They're more powerful together, and they're powerful when we share them with leaders, elected officials, people who can make decisions that impact the way individuals with disabilities live. And so I have the opportunity now to work with people across the country and help them learn how to use their stories to make change on the local stage and national level. And I'm going to give you two websites before we get off, but today I am going to focus on our story, really pretty focused on education, our educational experience. I had a prenatal diagnosis by choice, so I knew that my daughter was going to have Down syndrome before she was born. I am happy I knew. I would do it the same way again, but I'm not saying that is how everyone should do it. It's just what was right for my family. I'm a control freak, and I wanted to know, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it as we thought it then, if anything was wrong. Of course, Rachel's perfect just like she is, but I wanted to know so I could be prepared, and it did help us to be prepared. And that's her little dolly picture on the left side of my screen. I just love that little picture. So when Rachel was born, I was already ready to get started in early intervention, and she actually started early intervention when she was a week old and speech therapy when she was like 2 weeks old. And we lived in Tennessee at the time. My beautiful accent is not from Tennessee, it's actually from Arkansas, but we lived in Memphis for 10 years. And she was born in Memphis, and we had an exceptional early intervention program. At the time, it was called Special Kids. And part of we came there as a group, and we had 3 other families in the group we were in, and our name was Ben's Angels. We got to choose names for our little groups, and we were together for 3 years. And we went through therapies and had things in our home and all kinds of different things. But one of the best things they did for us was they brought our parent teacher and training information, parent training and information center in, which Leah's going to talk about. They're in West Tennessee, and they taught us special education law and our rights and responsibilities. To this day, when people ask me how I know so much about special education law, it's because of that. And I strongly encourage families to start at that age and learn that law, because I knew the law. That is how I was able to advocate for my daughter. There are people that will say, you don't need to know how that law will make you adversarial. The law is adversarial anyhow. It will educate you so you will be able to advocate for your child. So I'm a strong believer in that. I also got involved as much as I could in local, state, and national organizations, started going to different conferences, and I started working with others, including, we didn't have much of a local Down syndrome group, but we actually got it going more of the next few years. But we partnered with everybody we could find to partner with, because again, we're stronger together. Something that was really a turning point for me, and I like to say in turn for, I hope, a lot of other people, when Rachel was 2, I went to and when Rachel was 2, I went to a conference in Nashville and heard a speaker named Mike Remus. And Mike Remus is an inclusion guru. I call him an inclusion hired gun. He actually started out in Nebraska and then Kansas, and took the state of Kansas to due process, I think. But he was an administrator that went into school districts and taught them how to become fully inclusive. And I heard him and a young woman with Down syndrome named Karen Gaffney and a young woman named Fiona Hawk with Down syndrome. But all 3 of them said the same thing. They said inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. And I went to all 3 of them after I heard them spoke, and especially Karen and Fiona, and said, I want my daughter to have what you have. And they said, inclusion, 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 don't let them separate your daughter. So I bought it hook, line, and sinker, and did my research and decided that's what we wanted. And I knew what the research and the law said about Rachel being included. And Stephanie, I don't even remember what's on my slide, so I don't know when I want them changed. So anyhow, something, and that's pretty good there. Okay. So something I want to say, Stephanie said something about helping them find their voices. One of the things when I work with young families that I talk to them about a lot is helping your child find their voice early. And when I say helping your child find their voice, they may be nonverbal. It doesn't have to be a physical voice. There's other ways to have a voice, and we have to start early. Stephanie talked about going to the doctor. Well, we started having the doctor talk to Rachel when she was really young. We've been very fortunate to have really good medical professionals overall, I would say. And that's never been an issue for us, but it has been for a lot of people. You can do little things. Let your child order for themselves at restaurants. If it takes them a little too long, so be it. But that's just one way that they can learn little things like that. But I think it's just really important. Stephanie also said something that we tell families frequently. We say that you know your child best, and you do. I believe that very strongly. But I also believe you have to educate yourself if you're going to be able to educate others. So you have to go out and find out what is the latest research and how this applies to your child so that you can advocate for the best things. So I'm actually going to be really specific about our school experience. We were in the greater Memphis area, and I was told by someone that the people at our school, the school we were zoned for, that they had not had special education for very long there. So that's probably why they had never included a child with Down syndrome in the general education classroom. And I said, well, it is 2005, and I'm not really sure how that could be, because IDEA was passed in 1975. they didn't think too much of that response, but we had Rachel go to a private preschool because we wanted her with her typical peers, and the public school preschool program did not offer that option. And that's one of the best decisions that we made. We paid for it. We did not ask the school district to pay for it. I didn't have the energy. If she had not had Down syndrome, I would have had to pay for her to go to preschool. And at that point, that was not something that was worth the fight for me. By the time we won that fight, she would have been in 3rd grade. So we did that, and we could do that. Not everybody has that option. But when she started kindergarten, we had read the research. We knew our child. We knew what the private preschool had told us. By the way, many private preschools don't take children with disabilities. They don't come out and tell you that. They use things like, well, they're not potty trained, so they can't come to this school. And if Rachel, we had a great private preschool, but she was potty trained. And so we didn't have any excuses with her, but it is just absolutely wrong that private preschools do not take children with disabilities. That's a different advocacy topic though. So when we went to her kindergarten meeting, they called in someone from the district office who did not usually come to kindergarten IEP meetings. And we had a 5.5-hour IEP meeting, and I would be happy to share the recording with you if you would like, because we did record it. And we had made up our mind, and we drew a line in the sand and said, she's going to be in the gen ed classroom. And then I did something, and I teach a lot of parents to do this, but I had a mentor in Memphis who told me to do this, and it worked, and I used it a lot through the years. What they offered for Rachel was that she would go in what they called a functional skills classroom, which was a segregated setting, and that she would be in there for everything except the specials. And we didn't want her visiting the regular classroom. We wanted her to be a part of the regular gen ed classroom. So we said 13 times, we know our child best. The law says Rachel should be in the least restrictive environment. And the least restrictive environment for Rachel is the general education classroom, and that's what we want. And then we shut our mouths, zipped our lips. It's very effective because they don't like silence. And Charlie Brown's teachers went, wah, 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 wah. And we did that 11 or 12 times, and we took a break because nobody was budging. And we had taken a friend with us to the meeting just to have support. You can't make this stuff up, okay? So we took a break because people were getting a little heated, and we went in the hall, and we'd taken a friend with us. The friend did happen to work for the PTI, but anyhow, and she made him mad from the start, because she said if Rachel didn't have a visible disability, we wouldn't be having this meeting. And her point was Rachel could do what other students could do that were going into kindergarten. And they said, well, we don't put people in classes because of the way they look. And that wasn't what she was really saying. But anyhow, so when we went out in the hallway, Janess was her name, and she said, y'all need to say that one more time, your broken record. And if they don't say, okay, then you need to say what are our procedural safeguards, which at the time basically meant that we were going to go to due process. Well, we didn't have the money to go to due process, but we didn't figure they knew that. Okay. And she said, she said, your case is not winnable for them. I do not think that, she said, I think they'll cave. So sure enough, we said it that 13th time, and they said, okay. And I left and thought, oh my gosh, I hope I know what I'm doing. And we talked to someone that was in the room when we took the break, and the person from the district office, the special education teacher said that Rachel could not function in the gen ed classroom, and then she refused to sign the IEP. And I'm going to tell you about the parallel universe here in just a second, but what we found out some of what was said in the room while we were out, and they weren't meeting, it was just people talking. But the special education teacher said maybe if we put her in the general education classroom just a little bit more. Well, they had a preschool consultant who had worked with our family, and she was a huge cheerleader. And she said, I know this family, they're not going to go for that. They want full inclusion. And the guy from the district office said, then that's what you need to do, because that's what the law says they should have. Now, why he didn't say that after we said that the first time, I don't know. But we got her fully included in kindergarten. I believe that set Rachel's trajectory for her life as it is now. We had to fight. We moved here to Kansas when she was in the 3rd grade, and we did have to fight for her every year. It was much easier than Kansas than it was in Memphis, I can tell you that. And the fights were a little bit different, but we did have to work. The school, you know, we came here for many reasons. One was the promise of better schools, and the schools were better here. But I still have lots of stories about what went on from 3rd grade to 12th grade. And I'm just going to tell you a couple. One, when she was in the 4th grade, she was, I like to say, assaulted by the speech therapist. She was restrained. Rachel, who doesn't even have a behavior plan, was restrained by a speech therapist who used CPI restraint and took her to the floor twice. And the speech therapist did not report it. And someone happened to see it and told her para, who we are still dear friends with. We're still dear friends with the special education teacher too. And long story short, they helped me to find out. And I went to the principal, and the principal didn't know about it either. Needless to say, that speech therapist did not work with Rachel anymore, ever again. But I only knew what to do because I knew the law, and that's also how I got involved in seclusion and restraint legislation in the state of Kansas. Because my theory was, if Rachel, who is verbal, I mean, you can't always understand what she's trying to tell you, but if Rachel, who is verbal, and me, who is a pretty scary kind of mom, is at the school all the time, if that can happen to her, what on earth has happened to our other children? So I got involved in seclusion and restraint, worked with Disability Rights Kansas, and was part of a task force that got some good, not perfect, but good regulations in the state of Kansas for our families. Then when we went to middle school, 5th grade, it was the first year they would have the 6th graders, the first new class of 6th graders going into middle school. They changed it that year. This is graduation. We're going to get to that in a second, but you can stay there if you want. No, go ahead and go to the next one. It's fine. Because I'm going to hop there just a second. But when she went into middle school, we had 22 people at her transition IEP meeting, and her 5th grade teacher who went with her didn't go with her. It just so happened she went to middle school and had her for language arts, but she called me at home that night after the meeting and said, "Jawanda, I'm so sorry. When I talked about Rachel, I didn't say everything I wanted to say because I don't like talking to adults, and there were so many people in the room." And I said, "Well, how do you think I'm not like this, but how do you think some of these poor parents feel that go into a room like that?" But an interesting thing that happened with that is they told me that she wasn't going to get electives in middle school. And I said, "Oh, well, that's not going to happen. What do you mean she's not going to get electives?" And they said, "Well, she will have resources, her elective." I said, "Oh, not going to happen." I said, "Tell me why she needs resource." And they told me, and it was all about tracking IEP goals. And I said, "Well, it sounds to me like y'all need a resource class, but she doesn't need a resource class. And we're not gonna, you've been over here at the elementary school telling these kids about electives all year. And it is a more even playing field in those elective classes than it is those other classes. So we're going to be having an elective." Needless to say, I won that too. But we had really, really good teachers and really, really good case managers. And we had a few not so great people. It was really more administration that was the issue than it was the teachers. And we had a lot of teachers that had never taught anyone with Down syndrome because they'd never had kids with Down syndrome in their classrooms because they were sent off to another room. They weren't educated with the other students, even though IDEA was passed in 1975. But in high school, and this is something we did throughout Rachel's life, we have always, especially in education, tried to focus on big picture concepts. I don't really care if Rachel can tell you all the little minutia about Shakespeare. What I want her to be able to do is tell you the big picture. And when she went into 9th grade, another family said to me, "We don't know why you would want," they had a child with Down syndrome, and they said, "We don't know why you would want Rachel in gen ed English. She's going to have to read Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet." And I was like, "Well, that's really kind of the point, isn't it? Because you know, when our kids aren't included in things like that, it's not just the education they miss out on, they miss out on socialization too, because there's common knowledge that a lot of us have, and we're able to talk about a book or an event in history. Well, guess what? If our kids are never exposed to that, how are they ever going to be able to have a conversation about that? So it wasn't just about education for us, but we also knew that the research showed that the number one predictor of inclusion as an adult is really inclusion as you grow up, and not just in school, but we've advocated for inclusion in all aspects of her life, from community to church to school. But another funny thing, I never liked Shakespeare myself, but I never wanted to tell anybody because I thought people would think I wasn't very smart. Well, Rachel loves Shakespeare. She did Shakespeare monologues. She had teachers that would say, we think she can do this monologue. And I was like, you do remember she has Down syndrome and working memory is a problem, right? And they were like, we think she can do it. And guess what? They were right. Rarely has there been a time that the teachers had higher expectations than I did, but that probably is one. And I wrote a blog. I have a blog called The Sassy Southern Gal. And if you Google that, I think you'll probably find me. You usually do. But I wrote this blog called Shakespeare and that inclusion thing, because it talks about what I just said and how all the outcomes of being in Gen Ed and being in Julius Caesar at her high school and learning about Shakespeare. So on May 20th, 2018, Rachel Mask graduated with a diploma, and I get teary still, from Olathe South High School. Rachel loved high school, and I thought took care of the train wrecks and let her love her school. She was the volleyball manager. She was on Stuco. She got to do almost everything she wanted except be a cheerleader, and I didn't have the energy to fight with them about that. So we just didn't fight that battle because I had other things that were more important. But you know, the principal from her kindergarten had once told me, when I said I couldn't imagine anybody allowing their child being in a class called the functional skills class, her principal said to me, well, Mrs. Mass, you should just be happy we don't still call it the profoundly retarded room. Yes. So needless to say, I sent that principal and that special education teacher who said Rachel could not function in the gen ed classroom an invitation to her graduation. So you know what? I don't live, and this is her case manager up here on the left. Miss Fitz is her name. We met her when Rachel went in 9th grade, and she was the volleyball coach, and it was her idea for Rachel to be the volleyball manager. And we're still friends with her. Rachel was at her wedding. We take gifts to her children, but you can flip the slide. Well, actually, I think it's the last one. Well, stay here a second, but I'll finish this. My last slide actually says the parallel universe. My husband and I often say we wish that there was a way to have a parallel universe, and look at what all these experts told us and how people told us that Rachel couldn't do this and couldn't do that, and that she couldn't be included in gen ed and different things along the way. You're getting a real snippet of our life and not everything that went on. But you know, I wonder if we lived in that parallel universe and went back and did what we were told, what the difference would be in Rachel and who Rachel is today. And I believe Rachel is who she is in large part because she has been included in things. And people tell us that you know, children need to be in a life skills class because they need to be learning these different things instead of being in gen ed. Well, I say that what better way is there to learn life skills of navigating other people, navigating people that don't know you, navigating, working with groups, all those, getting other people to listen to you. All of those things are important life skills that Rachel learned through the environment that she was in. And guess what? All those kids that went to school with her, I believe most of them see the world differently too. And I hear from some of them frequently saying, we just want to tell you we're so glad we went to school with Rachel. one young woman who was in education sent me this long message and said, Jawanda, I didn't know, Mrs. Mast, I didn't know until I went to college that other people didn't have someone with an intellectual disability in their class. And she said, I look at it now and realize how hard you all had to work for Rachel to be in class with us. And I'm really glad I had her in my class because I think it helps me to see the world differently. And I think she's right. So we took people along the ride with us. That picture at the Capitol is when we were in DC in 2018. Those two young women are two of Rachel's best friends from church. And they went, and without much prompting, they marched into senator and congressman's offices and told them why it was not fair that Rachel didn't have the same opportunities they had. That's powerful stuff. Rachel's first job was at Olive Garden. She worked there for 3 years and loved it. She went to college for a short stint that didn't work out as well as we'd hoped it would. That's life, right? She did project search, but she got a job 6 months ago at KU Med. It's a long drive and we have transportation issues, but she loves it. She's an actress and wants to be on Broadway, but we told her she had to do something to make money and that would have to be a side job. And if she didn't have Down syndrome, that's what I would tell her. But you know what? She loves being at KU because she gets to do what she likes doing. She's a patient greeter and she loves people. She has an infectious smile. I think you can see that. She's mine, but she just does. It's just the way it is. And she gets to interact with people. And she says that she thinks she gets to make people happy. And I will tell you, the most effective advocate I know is that young lady right there. And she goes with me and we advocate together and she marches in and she tells people why they should. She did recorded testimony that Stephanie and Leah would both be proud of for the IDD committee and told them why the basis assessment, which is the assessment that determines what you get on the Medicaid waiver, why it was humiliating and made her sad and made her cry. And she's the only testimony that got a round of applause. So she's become quite the little self-advocate in her own right. But the last thing I want to say, I told you about my Sassy Southern Gal blog. There's a lot of stories on there that might or might not be helpful to you. The only other thing I want to tell you guys tonight is I said I work for the National Down Syndrome Congress. We have a spot on our website, and the website is, I'll put it in the chat, ndsccenter.org. It's called Policy and Advocacy. And under that, it has trainings and resources. It doesn't matter if it's a child with Down syndrome. It may be geared toward Down syndrome, but almost everything on there could be geared toward anybody with IDD, any disability. But it has some really good resources to help you, gives you some tools and gives you some websites and just gives a lot of really good information. So I hope some of you will check that out. So I have no idea how long I took, Stephanie. So
you're good. You're good,
anyhow.
Jawanda. You and Rachel have a powerful story. So you are a force. I've said this to so many people. You are a force to be reckoned with. So you're amazing and an amazing role model for those of us who want to be just as hardcore advocate as you are. So thank you. I appreciate
your checks in the mail, Stephanie.
Yeah, it better be. So now we're going to move on to Leah Holly, and she's got two sons, and she's going to share stories about both of them. But Sean is up first. So
Sean is the man. Thank you very much. And it's hard to follow both of you. And, you know, I know we're talking to parents and we're talking to educators and others. And, you know, the most important thing that we can do is all advocate together. And so our story, our journey started when Sean was 2. We were told Sean was a typical toddler and began to lose his language around 18 months. We took him to KU, sorry, Stephanie, and had a neurologist tell us that he was would never have eye contact, never make eye contact, never be a functioning member of our family, be prepared to put him in an institution by the time he was in his teens, that he is severely autistic. So at that point, I knew nothing about disability. I had been a high school math teacher before I had boys. And my only experience with a person with disabilities, Jawanda, actually was a young lady with Down syndrome. The day I graduated, and I'll date myself, 1984, they shoved Cindy in front of me and said, Cindy's been here 21 years, she needs to graduate. I had 78 kids in my classroom. I had never seen Cindy. She was in a portable someplace hidden. And so that was my only experience. And as a high school teacher, I had no experience. I did substitute in those classrooms in the basement where they hid the students. And I promised Sean the day he was diagnosed that he would never be one of those students. I had no idea how I would make that happen. And I had no idea the journey that we would be on. And so we get this diagnosis and I'm fired up trying to figure out how do we get him the services that he needs? How do we ensure that not only Sean has what he needs, but our family? We're a military family, just new to Kansas at that point. And when he got that diagnosis, I thought I was the only parent, the only mom in Kansas who had a kid with autism. Like Jawanda, I called our Parent Training and Information Center, and in Kansas, that is Families Together. And I can still see Bonnie. I told her, I said, hey, or I can still hear her voice. I said, hey, Bonnie, I don't think you can help me. Nobody else can help me. All the other people say I've got the wrong number, wrong, we make too much money. He's too old, too young, whatever. We can't get help. And I told her about Sean. She said, oh yeah, you're not alone. There's another mom whose kid does that. And I said, no, you don't understand. He has autism. This was back in 1994. And so our journey started by talking to another parent. And that's the nice thing about Families Together is we are all parents. And so as I talked to Mary, their family is still a part of our family. And we began to understand that we were not alone and that Sean we were no longer an autistic family. We were a family with some pretty unique needs, but we had some crazy strengths too. And so Sean starts going through the preschool setting. Before he even got to preschool, we tried to get him private speech therapy. TRICARE, our health insurance at that point, said, we don't cover autism. He can communicate with other 2-year-olds. He had no language whatsoever. So we had to go to a Senate appeal just to get him and the speech therapy, as well as get him get them to rewrite the TRICARE manual. We also did the same thing when he had to have a MEG scan before he had brain surgery for seizures when he was 5. We had to fight TRICARE because they would not do a scan that they would do for civilians, but not at an Army base, but not for our family member. So we have fought that medical all along, trying to find Sean the appropriate care. And I'll tell you, one of the hardest things to find is mental health care for individuals who have intellectual disabilities as well as mental health challenges. Sean has obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, which stems from that, as well as some others. I mean, I could spout out the alphabet of his different diagnoses, but I'll tell you what, he is Sean. And so throughout his school career, we have fought and we have worked as part of a team. And I'll tell you, we moved from Junction City. We were getting ready to move from Junction City to Fort Leavenworth area. And one of the most important things we did was, one, research the community, talk to other parents who had kids with more significant challenges. I didn't care if you had autism or not. I wanted to know how you navigate that school. How do they work with people with needs, special needs, and how is that community? We also did I will tell you, throughout Sean's career, we have done person-centered planning. And that is the most invaluable thing you can do for your family member is get back to the person. So many times when our kiddos have disabilities, we focus on what they can't do, the IEP, the medical. It's all about what they need. For Sean, we took it back, and we always take it back to what his strengths, interests, and passions are, and how do we use those to engage him in wherever he is, in school or in the community. And so we did that prior to moving to, and I had researched the school district, found someone who knew how to do the visual language, that strategies that we were using with Sean. At that point, we moved to Bonner Springs, and first thing, sitting at the first IEP meeting, we've told them for 6 months, he has a one-to-one para, here's what's happening, communicating with the district, communicating with the teacher. Thought we walked into this amazing team, walk in, and the first thing the special education director says, we bus all of these kids to KCK because they're our co-op, and that's where our autism room is. And I said, well, he's not on autism. He's not autism. He's Sean. How are we going to meet his needs here? So we come up with a way we called it his transitional resource room, because in reality, Sean could not be in a general education classroom 100% of the time. He needed that supports. He needed to be able to pre-learn some skills. He needed sensory breaks and breaks from all that chaos. But like Jawanda said, one of the most important things you can do is start that inclusion early. And not saying if you didn't do it early, it's too late. But if you've got a kiddo on that verge, do it. Start now. Start getting them included. So Sean was in the general education classroom. He was in the resource room. And I'll just tell you one story. First off, you are not the only advocate for your child. Stephanie mentioned it at the beginning. You've got to include that community, that school, that community, everybody in their life, helping them understand the disability and know the person so they can help advocate. So we created a circle of friends for Sean at school. One day, Sean is dropping to the floor, kicking and screaming, and he was doing this quite often. The para would pick him up and carry him back to the special ed room. He's losing dignity. She's losing dignity. She's getting bruises. He's escalating. And so he kept saying, one of the peers said, he's saying happy birthday. So at that point on, when Sean would fall to the floor, everybody would start singing happy birthday. Okay, I'm going to say it because you can't be pissed off if you're singing happy birthday. Okay, and so everybody, their whole stress level goes down. Sean is now successful in the environment because he's got the supports, but that's also because we help the peers understand autism and know how to communicate with Sean. And so throughout his journey, his peers became his advocates. But as he was in that first year in Bonner, we started having some major issues because he didn't have a one-to-one para. He did not have the support he needed. His teacher didn't have the support he needed. And I mean, this could be a whole story. Actually, Sean's story is in Rudd Turnbull's textbooks on family school partnerships on the trust piece, where we were at a very, very bad place. We had filed due process. We had filed civil rights because the administration was saying, we can't provide that assistive technology. We're not going to provide the para. He had a seizure at school, and the teacher had the OT. I get a phone call, I get to school, and there's the nurse is just getting there, and he's got crackers and drinks. And you don't do that with a person who just had a seizure. So we had issues across the board, health and education and inclusion and social. I was told I cannot come into the school building without an escort because I was causing disruption. I was making the teachers cry. Guys, this affects everybody in my family. My husband is ticked because we bought a house And we could have been living on Fort Riley and had a bigger house and paid less taxes and all of that. I can't even go to my oldest son's Valentine's Day party without an escort. So we stepped back, called families together, which I had worked with to get him that para in preschool because he was eating rocks and running away and hanging nude from the monkey bars, and the teachers begging for help. So we had called families together then. So call families together. Man, I'm armed, guys. I'm armed with my rights. I was firing off letters with all of this, you are in violation of this. You're not providing him FAPE. He's not in the least restrictive environment. They're firing back letters with legal. And guess who's losing? Sean. Sean is falling through the cracks. He's regressing. My family is the anxiety, the stress of the whole family thing. I finally stepped back because I knew that one teacher was his best advocate. She needed help. So we stepped back, called families together. We called, at that point, it was called Kissin. It's now called TASN, the Technical Assistance Support Network at KSDE. We brought them in to do some observations. Families together did person-centered planning with us. But one of the keys was, as a family member, and Jawanda and Stephanie and every other family member can tell you, the hardest thing to do is trust. I'm trusting you with my baby, especially when your baby doesn't have a verbal voice to tell you what's happening. And so I called that teacher during the summer and said this was his first grade year. We battled that whole year. We pulled him out for safety reasons, filed that due process, called her and said, can we start over? We need to get back to Sean. So we did person-centered planning again. We brought in not only the school team, but the people in the community who loved and supported Sean, did that person-centered planning, made sure this teacher got the support she needed. Sean and that teacher were successful. It took us another year to rebuild that team. Quite honestly, there were people still on that team who, the day he graduated, did not like me and said I would tell paras and others that I was that parent. And sorry about the dog in the background. I'm sure Sean will be making an appearance in a minute. But so we worked together, had to rebuild that team in order for Sean to be successful. Because we could have filed, we could have went through with the due process, and the law could say it takes 3 months, 6 months, a year. It takes years, and we're burning bridges in our community. We had to rebuild that team. We rebuilt that team. That teacher is now one of Sean's biggest advocates to this day. Sean, in the picture up on the, I guess it would be your right, with him with all the students, that is his circle of friends. That is, we were at a IEP meeting and they were talking, I said, what are general education students doing? Because at this point, he's in the gen ed class a lot more. I said, what are other general education students doing? And we went around and we talked about it. And because his brother's 15 months older, I said, what about the science project? And they're like, oh, but our kids, they don't have to do that. And I said, Sean is a general education student first and foremost. He just happens to need special education services. So Sean did a science project paired with a peer who had limited parental participation. Jonathan's dad was a single dad who had 2 jobs, struggling, and to be honest, parents do the science project. Sean and Jonathan did their science project determining which pizza had the most pepperoni. And so Sean and Jonathan got to share pizza with their peers. So now Sean's people want to be Sean's friends because kids love food, guys. Kids love food. So we've advocated throughout making sure that Sean was a part of everything. When we moved to middle school, we started hearing that, oh, he has to be in that KCK again. We've got to move him there because we can't support students like him. Sean was the first student in our district to be included from the time he got there in first grade all the way, and he created the 18 to 21 services. First student with a significant disability to stay in the district. And I will tell you what, it's one of the greatest things we ever did for him, because now he can go in the community and people know him. He was on the high school swim team. When you're talking about advocating in the community and advocating in schools, you have to look at what your individual strengths are and what their uniqueness is, okay? So one of the things Sean does is verbally, if you want to know the word STEM is what professionals call it. For us, it's singing. So every time we would go to Walmart or Price Chopper anyway, and he would do that, we turn around and look and say, hey, Sean, what are you singing today? Now we go into places and people celebrate that singing. Sean's singing today. And so celebrating that diversity, and along the way, making sure that you're empowering people who are around him, supporting those teachers, supporting those peers with information. That picture in the middle with Sean and that group of kids, one of his personal care attendants, through his IDD, intellectual developmental disability Medicaid waiver, was a volunteer at a Kansas City, Kansas school with their forensics team. She said, can Sean go with me? I said, I don't care where Sean goes, as long as he's learning and people are learning from him, we're all in. He needs to be there. Sean was there, and he can tell you his wants and needs, but he's not going to be on the forensic team. Well, there were students who wanted to be on the team, but were too shy to get up and talk to others. So they talked to Sean originally. And one day he walked in and they all started doing the Sean dance. They had created the Sean dance. This is not in his own school. This is in his community. And so finding ways to make sure that you are celebrating and including your kids in things that you don't. Okay, just to quote my oldest son, you don't know what he can do if you don't let him try. Okay, you don't know what he can do if you don't let him try. Opportunity is everything. My oldest son still tells me every day that, because mom still holds him back sometimes. And so our question is always, why not? And then take a deep breath and let them tell me why not. And then say, okay, what can we do to make this happen? But Sean's journey, he now works. He's had several different jobs, and I will tell you, I know I'm kind of crunched on time, but one of his jobs was at Legends Toyota at the Legends, okay? And I can't say enough about that team there, how inclusive and supportive they were. Same slide, Steph. So if you see down on the bottom left, he's wiping fingerprints off the car. We had approached the owner with the support of VR, and that's a whole nother story about our journey with VR, because we struggled with VR when Sean was just out of high school trying to get that job and getting the right people on board who could help him. Now, we all said something about VR, and I will tell you, VR is getting better in Kansas. It's under new leadership. Things are getting better, and so just because we've had struggles doesn't mean everybody else is going to have those same struggles. Our kids are paving the way for your kids. And so we told the owner of Legends Toyota, when Sean, myself, his attendant, his friend Danielle, and his targeted case manager and the job specialist from VR went for the interview, and told him, I said, look, he needs a job outside because he likes to sing loudly. And Deuce, the owner, said, you know what, if people don't like to hear his singing, they can shop on a different day. Sean can come Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. And we said, we think he would be good at wiping, cleaning wet cars, drying the cars off. He called the people who come and wash the cars. He said, nope, can't do that. I'm like, okay, great, another one down. And he said, that's not enough work for Sean. I want him to clean the fingerprints off my cars in my showrooms. And he can do that Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. So for an hour a day, Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, and that's because of Sean's stamina. We lost a lot of ground between high school and finding that job because of that battle we had. And so Sean was cleaning the fingerprints off cars, and Sean has one thing. If you learn one thing from Sean's saying is do your share. Everybody do your share. All right. So for those of you who are from the same generation, you know where that's from. Okay. Barney. But he will tell you do your share. So at the dealership, he would get very loud and say, do your share. His anxiety was high. We tried everything we could to help him be successful. And finally, after 6 months, I sent Deuce a letter and said, we can't do this. It's not the right job for him. It's the right place. It's the right people. Guys, this was hard because Sean does not like things that are perceived as cleaning. We knew that going in, and we were afraid this wasn't going to work. And so Deuce sends me back an email and thanks me for the opportunity. And he said, I don't know if you know that you were afraid do your share was a barrier. He said, for our team, we now use that. Sean taught us more about teamwork and team building in that 6 months than anybody has ever, because now we start our meetings with do your share. If you do your share, I'll do my share, and our customers will be happy. So as a team, we have to do our share and be a part of that. And that kind of pulls me back to that swimming picture. Sean was a part of the swim team when he was a freshman. We were so excited. He was the first student with a disability to be a part of the swim team. He swam in the home meet. People cheered for him. He was that kid who, before the videos came out on Facebook. Sophomore year, we're getting him, trying to get him to practice. He's falling to the ground, crying, kicking, screaming. We tried for weeks to get him back to the practice. Finally, his brother said, Mom, you wouldn't make me run track, would you? He's telling you he does not want to do this. So listening to those people around you and building that trust and building that partnership. Stephanie, if you want to move to JP's. So I talked a little bit about JP. When JP was in 2nd grade, we were told he most likely would never read on grade level. He was reading on a pre-primer level. He was struggling with speech. He would say, my name is JP Holly the third instead of the third. Struggled with this. And we were told, oh, he doesn't need services. He doesn't need services. But because of what I had learned with Sean, I was able to effectively advocate for JP. I knew my rights. I knew how to get him the services. It turns out that he has scotopic sensitivity syndrome, or Irlen syndrome, where his brain perceives light differently. It also could be considered visual dyslexia. We took JP to a specialist, did testing, and if you see in the picture of him standing there with the cake, he's wearing filtered lenses and glasses. These are not prescription, they are filtered lenses. They help stop the words from moving on the page. We had a special ed director tell us we had to put in his IEP that he could wear them because teachers were telling me couldn't because they look like sunglasses. We had to have the Disability Rights Center come in, help us with a mediation, and get the school district, because the SPED director stopped all special education services and said, we're not providing anything unless you sign for us to take this out, because if we provide it for him, we have to provide it for others. We didn't want him to pay for anything. So during that time, JP had gotten those glasses. When he got those glasses, he gained 18 months in reading in 3 months. We started back with the special education after the mediation, and that's another long story. And JP at this point, by the time he was in 8th grade, with some intensive support from some great special education teachers, by the time he was in 8th grade, he was tested out of LD services and into gifted. And he now reads books that I can't even fathom starting to read. The words, his vocabulary, everything. The picture of him on the top right, we had just moved to Bonner. He struggled with being able to get in front of people and speak, but he had to do a presentation. Everybody has to do a presentation with a visual aid. Well, JP, I'm not doing it, Mom. I'm not doing it, and I'm not going to draw some picture of some dead person, because that's what everybody does. And I said, well, tell me about him. And I can tell you, it was Cortez. I could still hear his conversation. I said, well, tell me about him. He said, Mom, he's dead. What does it matter? And I said, all right. We went to Price Chopper. We got a cake. We crumbled up Oreos on it, made it look like a grave. He wood burned his notes on a tombstone or a headstone, the kids weren't looking at him when he was presenting. They were looking at that cake. Can I get a piece of that cake? From that point on, we used a lot of visual aids that were food related to help build that self-confidence. We put him behind a camera so that he could hide behind the camera to build that self-confidence. JP now does presentations about being a sibling. The picture on the bottom left is Sean and JP. JP asked Sean to be his best man in his wedding. Sean rocked it in front of 250 people. He did everything a best man would do, except the bachelor party. Mom wasn't keen on that one. Sorry. But JP and Mallory didn't know that Sean was going to sing, do a toast. And Stephanie will know Sean's thing is happy birthday. He is the birthday guy. So at the wedding, Sean's toast was singing happy wedding day. And so here he's leading 250 people singing happy wedding day at his brother's wedding. And there's nothing, everything we did from that moment, from that time he was diagnosed forward, led to that moment, provided him those social opportunities, the ability to communicate, the ability to celebrate his differences and his disabilities. The picture of JP standing there with the coach, JP ran track, and I'm going to tell you the most inspirational, Sean inspires me every day, but JP had to have back surgery, spinal fusion surgery, has a rod in the back from L2 to T2. We had to navigate that insurance thing. We had to navigate school stuff because they said, oh, the doctor said, just have him sit against a wall. Don't worry about it. But in his junior year, he had that surgery. He had to run in the final track meet. Mom, I have to do it. I have to do it. I'm standing on the side with the coach yelling, get off the track, get off the track. He's barely moving. I'm crying. The coach is crying. He's like, Mom, I have to do this. I can do this. And he finished the race dead last, well behind everybody else. But it was the most inspirational thing because he had learned to advocate and he had learned to believe in who he was. That's thanks to his advocacy, our advocacy, and our family's belief in being able to be there. JP was at his second grade IEP meeting, and when they're talking about we can't do this in the IEP, and the special ed director looked at him and he said, JP, you know, my words moved on the page too when I was your age, but my mom, when I got older, got me bifocals. And JP literally leaned across the table and said, I'm sorry, your mom doesn't love you. It didn't love you as much as my mom did. And so we created a self-advocate. But, you know, in a snapshot, that's our journey. I will tell you, person-centered planning, which Families Together will help you do using life course tools, as well as peer involvement, educating families. You know, you need to know your rights and responsibilities. That's what Families Together can help you. We'll look at the IEP because I am proud. I work for Families Together and have been there for 22 years. They were the ones that opened that door. That call to Families Together was our first opening the doors, because before that I closed the door and I was isolated. And so if you're looking for support, information, ways to navigate or get back to your kid because your team is fighting or has lost sight of that inclusiveness, Families Together, we're here for you. And I'm going to tell you that they have been there for our family. Stephanie, that was a quick snapshot.
I know. Each one of us could probably go on. You know, when I asked Jawanda if she would do this and I told her what I wanted her to do, she's like, well, that's a 3-hour tour. So I know that each of us would be happy to share more. You know, reach out to Leah at Families Together. Jawanda put out her, and this is on Facebook too, her sassy Southern Gal, is it? Or Southern Sassy Gal?
Sassy Southern Gal.
Sassy Southern gal. Reach out to Jawanda through Sassy Southern gal. She would be happy to chat with you too and talk to you. You can always reach me. You all have my email address. But I know we're like right on time at 7:30, but if anybody has any questions, comments, we're happy to we are happy to entertain them for a few minutes. I didn't see anything on Facebook.
Stephanie, you do have a hand raised.
Yeah, Vasavi.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Vasavi Vaduri. I'm from India. So I'm the current ongoing long-term LEN trainee. I'm so glad to be here today, and it was really inspiring getting to know all these stories and how well I can be an advocate for my own child. I have a child on the spectrum, and you really added a lot of hope to our story. So thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing this with me.
Absolutely. We're glad that you're here, not just tonight, but in the LEN program as well. You're going to make a wonderful advocate, not just for your children, but for a lot of people in your future, I know. So I'm really excited to have you as part of our LEN group. Anybody else?
Stephanie, this is
Crystal.
Crystal.
Sure.
I have a question for any one of the presenters. I've heard some really inspiring stories, and you sound like you guys were all born as advocates. But what do you think is the single most impactful thing that we can do to advocate for not just our children, but all children?
I think, and I'll just say, believe in your children. Believe in your children, and the strengths, as Leah had said, one of the things is in my mission now is even 0 to 5, our psychologists, our doctors, everybody needs to be talking to families, and they're the ones who see the families most, about strengths-based, because as Leah said, it's always negative. It's from the diagnosis to the IEPs to the basis to get on the IGD waiver or anything else. It's always talking about the negatives, and we've really got to change the voices and make it a positive, and looking at the positive experiences. As you can hear, Leah and Jawanda and we all talked about that, and I think as we see that and we share that more professionals, the doctors, the psychologists, the teachers, everybody will also see the positives in kids moving forward. But go ahead, ladies, if you have something to add to that.
I can say that, there are so many things that we as a community can do, but celebrate diversity and speak up for people in your community to be included, and make sure that in your schools and communities, those opportunities our parents aren't being pushed in the wrong direction, and that parents know where those resources are. I mean, there are school districts, when your kid hits a certain age, they send you off someplace else because they don't have the resources. They don't even try to have the resources. And so make sure that parents know that resources are out there to help them and that they're not alone. Because guys, self-care for families, I'm gonna tell you, I don't know about you guys, but I have some mental health challenges, and I'm deaf in one ear. I've got my own needs, and I need that support. And so having that community wrapped around our family members, to me, is the most important thing, because I know when Sean goes out that door, everybody cares about him. And he, like Stephanie said, let him self-advocate, listen to their voices, even when they don't have a voice. Jawanda?
I don't think I can say one single thing. I love what Stephanie and Leah both said. I would say educating yourself is really, really important. But kind of what Leah said, I wrote this thing the Mighty picked up called What I Would Say 21 years later. It was when Rachel was 21. I actually started doing it when she was 14, because all these younger families would say, what would you say now that Rachel's a little older? So I started doing one every year. And I'd just say a few things that I would say to anybody when they had a child, whether it was Down syndrome or something else, okay? But one of the things I talk about is taking care of yourself and giving yourself a break. And that kind of goes along too, though, with connecting to other people. You know, social media is great and the internet is great, but go find real live people to do this journey with. That's for self-care, and that's to do what Lee and Stephanie both just talked about, to have that community that's going to be there for your child and for all children. And that doesn't mean that I have a group of moms that don't live here. They're from the Down syndrome community. We've met over the years. And once a month we do a Zoom. I hate Zooms because I don't like seeing myself, but I give in and do it with them. But we live in different places and we do a Zoom once a month because our girls are about the same age. And we just talk through things. But you know what? I also have people here. And then I have this larger group of all the people that, you know, Leah, Stephanie, and I don't see each other every day, but if I needed something or I needed somebody to work with on something, I know I could go to them or other places. And anyhow, that's a really long answer for you. Okay. So.
Yeah. You know, a quick plug too for Families Together, and Dwanda had mentioned it and Leah had mentioned it earlier. I remember one summer, I spent the summer between 6th and 7th grade reading all special education laws in Kansas. And I will tell you, I wish I had known about Families Together at that point, because they do an education advocacy training in 8 hours that can tell you a whole lot more than trying to sit and read all those regs and understanding what they have. But, you know, you definitely have people out there. Again, you can always reach out to me. I send a ton of families to Families Together as well, because they're there for support. And Wanda is my like huge guru. Anytime I have any questions on policy and advocacy at the national and federal, national and state level, I love to go and talk to Jawanda too. So it depends on what you're needing. And I can promise you, if any of the things that we talked about tonight isn't something that you are looking and wanting or needing to advocate for in the moment, reach out to us anyways, because we have a huge network and know so many people that we will get you in touch with the right person that's either a guru on that or is going through it right now. So definitely do that. I will share next month, our session will be taking care of you and your self-care for neurodiverse girls and their caregivers, presented by the GNO team from University of Kansas Medical Center. So November 10th, and that email and information on that will go out towards the end of next week. So I want to thank you all. I know we're over on time, so I appreciate all of you for staying with us as long as you have, and enjoying this conversation with us, and feel free to reach out anytime. So, and thank you to Leah and Jawanda for answering my call and coming and sharing your stories and your families with us tonight.
Thank you for
Thank you
inviting us.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Y'all have a great night. Enjoy the weekend.
Go
Yeah,
Chiefs.
go Chiefs.
Go Bills. Go Buffalo.
Go Chiefs.